William followed the man into the room. Suddenly, the man was holding his head and barely standing straight. Then William felt dizzy himself. He looked over at the man. He had now collapsed to the ground and was convulsing violently. "65-year-old William Wharton pulled up his coat around his neck. He tucked his arms into his armpits of his coat, kicking his feet on the spot in a futile attempt to stay warm in the bitter cold. The alleyway in which he was hiding offered him little protection from the snow, but not from the wind, which seemed to cut straight to the bone. He was a thin man to begin with, but he had barely eaten in days, and he was reaching a point of desperation. Against his own wishes and his better judgment, he made his way to Crumpsall Workhouse. As he got closer to the dark, foreboding building that rose up in front of him, he wanted to turn back, but he needed food and warmth. He told himself it'd just be for a few days, a week at best, and then he'd be back out on the streets. As he got closer to the door, there was a family already trying to gain entry, a mother, a father, and a young girl. The mother and child were taken inside, but the father stood resting on his crutch, and when asked if he could work, William heard the man reply that he could not work due to his bad leg. And with this, the father was thrown back out into the snow, and the door was shut on him. William watched him pick himself up. The two men locked eyes just for a moment before the man hobbled off into the night, and William stepped towards the door and knocked. The workhouse was not a place you wanted to end up. It was a place of last refuge for the sick, the old, and those just too poor to pay back debts or rent lodgings. It was for people caught between poverty and destitution. At this time, there was no benefit system provided by the government, and there was no NHS. People could starve to death on the streets, or turn to the workhouse. At the time, there was a soaring population, particularly in towns and cities due to the rapid industrialisation. The workhouse was established in 1834 as a solution to the spiralling problem of growing poverty. The ideas of the time distinguished between the deserving and the undeserving poor. The workhouses must be and were used to shame the poor and humiliate them for even asking for help. They beat them down mentally and physically, because they wanted them to stand on their own 2 feet. In 100 years of the workhouses being open, 16 million people passed through their doors, and by the time they closed in 1948, 5 million people had died there, with most ending up in mass unmarked paupers' graves. To qualify for entry into the workhouse, you needed to prove that you were truly destitute, with no home, job, or money. Families were split up into men's ward, females' ward, and a children's ward, as authorities believed they could stop the toxic spread of poverty, so they separated people straight away upon entry. This strong belief in isolating individual groups of paupers was reflected and also encouraged by the architecture of these buildings, which reflected this. Being poor was seen as a crime, and it was your fault for not climbing your way out of poverty. William was coughing when he was inspected by those conducting the intake at the workhouse, and so he was taken in as the authorities assumed he was a sick man. He was led down the corridor, off to the men's wing, where he spent the rest of the night. When he woke, the authorities were on the ward, and they dragged out 2 men from the room. William asked the man next to him what was happening. The man introduced himself and said his name was Tom, and the 2 men that had been removed were graded as Class 10 individuals. People who were classed as 10 on the workhouse grading scale were seen as malingerers, and they were the undeserving poor, and were removed from the workhouse. William was led away to see the nurse, Sarah Gibson, to start his treatment, which was to be 2 tablespoons of medicine daily before breakfast, which was a meal of bread and cheese. Then he was led off to start his day, going off to unpick heavy rope, which was also a punishment used in prisons, only stopping for a plate of meat at dinner time, with the day ending at supper, which was more bread and cheese. Each day went on like this, every day up until the 18th of December 1899. This is when William and another man, John Smith, a new gentleman on the ward, went to see the nurse, Sarah Gibson. John went first and took his 2 spoons of medicine and left, while William spoke to the nurse Sarah a little and joked around before taking his medicine and leaving, going back to the men's ward. As William got there, he saw John leaning against the metal frame of a bed. He had his head in his hands. William asked him what was going on, and John just said, "My head, my head." Suddenly, William started feeling dizzy, and a headache rapidly hit him hard. He couldn't even think, it was just pain. William looked over to John, and he saw that John was being violently sick, and then he collapsed to the ground convulsing. People started running over, but then everything went dark. On the 20th of December 1899, an inquest was held into the death of 2 patients, 65-year-old William Wharton and 60-year-old John Smith, at Crumpsall Workhouse. It was found that both men had died after taking their prescribed medication given out to them by nurse Sarah Gibson, who stated that she gave William and John 2 tablespoons of medicine, after which, a short time later, they started complaining of feeling ill. The inquest revealed that the medicine that was made up at the dispensary at the workhouse, just like it always had been. However, whoever had made the solution this time had mistakenly added a poison, strychnine. Just half a grain of strychnine was enough to cause death. Nobody at the dispensary admitted to making up the medicine, and that meant no one could be held accountable. The coroner ordered that all poisons from then on should be kept under lock and key, and that they needed the bottles to be shaped differently to ordinary medicine bottles to avoid this happening again. However, it was reported to the coroner that this wasn't the first time people had died in this way at the workhouse, but these reports had gone ignored. There does not appear to be any more strychnine deaths at Crumpsall Workhouse after this case. However, there are other deaths relating to strychnine at other workhouses across England. Strychnine, meanwhile, was broadly used as a form of pest control and was very easy to get hold of. In humans, it causes frothing at the mouth, muscle spasms, which increase in intensity until the victim dies of asphyxiation due to paralysis of the neural pathways. Although it's a fairly unsubtle way to kill somebody, strychnine was a popular poison for some years, favoured by murderers such as Thomas Neil Cream, a Scottish doctor, Bell Gunness, who murdered for fun and insurance payouts, and in a particular sinister instance, the Penny Illustrated reported a case in 1871 in which poisoned food parcels were sent to families in Brighton bearing the message, quote, "A few homemade cakes for your children. Those done up are flavoured on purpose for yourself to enjoy. You will guess who this is from. I can't mystify you, I fear." End quote. This was later tracked down to be revealed to be Christina Edmonds, Brighton's famous chocolate murderer. Well, that'll do it for today, but let me know of your thoughts of today's story in the comments below, and if you think it was a simple accident, or there was a serial poisoner who saw an opportunity to do away with people who necessarily wouldn't have been missed, and ultimately escape justice. And if you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe as it really helps me out. Thank you for your support. Take care.